it was this bat in Central America, and the title was something like the masked seducers, right? And these bats have like a flap of skin that they put over their faces, and they perform something called leg behavior, which is like all the females are perched there, and they will just display themselves to be chosen by the female. So that is not described in a lot of species of bats. Specifically, it was described in this species, but on top of that there's this whole addition to it that not only they display themselves, but they mask themselves with this flap of skin that they have, and they're pretty ugly. I mean, bats can be very cute, but these ones don't have a cute face, so I can understand why they're masking it.
My guest today is Dr. Angie Salles, assistant professor at the University of Illinois at Chicago, Department of Biological Sciences. Angie, great to have you today.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I'm excited.
Yeah. So let's talk about bats.
Yeah.
What has been the most surprising thing you've learned about bats over the course of your research?
I think the most surprising thing is what basically ended up leading me to what I do today. So when I started working with bats, the thing I was most interested in is their echolocation behavior, because that's kind of the thing that has been studied for longer, the thing they're very well known for, and this like very unique thing that they do. So when I started working with them, it was kind of because of that. But as I started working with them, I realized that they're amazingly social animals that have like this wide repertoire of communication calls. And that was surprising to me because I feel there's very little known about it. Basically led me to what we do today in the lab, which is social communication and behavior in bats. And we kind of don't really think about echolocation that much. But yeah, that's been the most surprising thing.
I think people might be surprised to learn too that bats are, in terms of species, total number, after rodents, they are the most specious mammal. Right?
Yeah, there's over 1,400 species of bats. I think we're even close to 1,500, which is crazy, right? Because people think of, bats and they think they're all the same. Bats are bats, and no, it's we have like around. I think it's around a dozen different species here in Chicago, and around the world, like especially when you get closer to the tropics, there's even more different species. So, and each ones have conquered different little habitat spaces and niches, so they're also very different within the bat clade. They're very different to each other.
And bats also are one of those species that elicit a strong kind of reaction amongst people, right? Either negative or positive.
Yeah, and some of it, I have to say, like as a PSA, I do think is not warranted, but it's good to be cautious with bats, and in a way, it's a good thing that people fear them a bit, because then they'll take seriously the potential risks. So bats have amazing immune systems, and that makes them very good at handling disease and not getting sick from it, but it also makes them very good at carrying that disease and giving it to others. And one of the most deadly ones and dangerous ones is rabies. So if you encounter a bat and it scratches you or bites your dog or your cat, then go get the rabies shot, because if you get rabies, that's a really bad thing. Like the chances of dying are super hard, and you don't want super high, and you don't want that. But if you get the vaccine, you're safe, and it's really like that. It's like a black or white kind of situation. But they're also very smart and interesting animals, and only about 1 to 3% of them carry rabies. So it's not like every bat will make you sick. It's just something that, if you encounter one in the wilderness, you shouldn't be touching it just in case, as you wouldn't probably be touching a wild raccoon, or you shouldn't be touching a wild raccoon. Right. So a little bit of the fear, I think it's warranted, but there's also, I think, ideas, they're night creatures, and they come out in caves, and it's quite a spectacle. If you've never seen it, I recommend you go to Texas, and they have these amazing caves where the bats are coming out at dusk. So it can be beautiful, but it can also be a little daunting and scary. So I understand where the fear comes from, but I also, and although I do want people to be cautious with bats, I don't want people to be scared of bats because they're not mean. They don't want to bite you. They're not vampires, although we have a type of bats that are the vampire bats, but they won't attack humans on purpose. And yeah, they're smart and interesting animals that do a lot of good for our ecosystems. So we should want to protect them.
And there was some speculation that COVID may have originated with bats, correct?
Yeah, so we know that they can carry the COVID virus. Whether it really originated from bats, I think the jury's still out on that. I don't personally think that that's how it happened. There are many other options. There's I think there was some evidence that it could come from pangolins. Always, and that's kind of why always when interacting with wild animals, people should not be touching any wild animal. Just, they carry diseases, and some of the diseases can jump, and it's not just bats, it could be other animals too.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And so one of the things you look at is communication. Can you go a little bit into how bats communicate with each other, with other species, when hunting for prey?
So let me say that not all bats are hunters. Of the 1,500 species of bats, about 1,000 use the system that I mentioned before, echolocation, which is a way in which they are emitting this very high-pitched, very loud and high-pitched screams, and they're listening to all the echoes that are bouncing off of objects in their environment to build an auditory scene, basically like the Daredevil Marvel character, right? Or is it DC? I don't know. I'm gonna get shouted at for that. But that, like the Daredevil character, building a scene of acoustic scene of their surroundings. And bats that hunt, so some of these bats that use echolocation are hunters and they hunt insects. And when they're hunting insects, they direct these echolocation pulses straight to the insect and pay a lot of attention and can position their ears to try to get as much information from the echoes that are coming back. And they can modulate how fast they're emitting these echolocation calls. But that's not the only sound that they make. They make a lot of other sounds. Because they're so high pitched, our hearing range doesn't allow us to hear them. But if we slow them down in the same way that if you slow down music, it becomes like lower pitched. If we slow down, we can slow them down enough to get into our hearing range. And for example, this is what echolocation pulses or calls sound from a bat that is just searching the environment. And this is a North American insectivorous bat called the big brown bat.
And this would be what they'd be using when they're hunting?
Yes, this would be what they'll be using when they're hunting. And as they get closer to the prey, they make them faster and faster. So they go like pew, 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 and then pew, 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 at the end as they catch the prey.
And what kind of noise would they be making when they're communicating to one another then?
It's great that you asked that, because I have here an assortment of calls, of these communication calls that they make, and you'll see how different they are. So I always say that, and this is kind of tired for me, because I always say that if I hadn't told you that was a bat, it sounds like a bird.
Right.
And the only reason that we're not privy to these sounds is because they're happening above our hearing range. So it's too high pitched for us. But when you slow them down and you hear them, they're making these beautiful songs, right? And again, when you open the window and you hear the birds chirping, it's very obvious that they're communicating and telling each other things. But we open the window at night and we won't hear this. But it's not that it's not happening. It is happening. And they're telling each other a lot of things, like that they want to mate, that they want to defend their territory, that they want to find their pups or find their friends, or that they are in distress, or that they want to, get the others away from them, so they emit aggression calls. So they have very wide repertoires, and each kind of these repertoires depend on the species, right? So each species communicates with its own conspecifics.
Do we have any evidence that different species of bats can communicate? Can they decipher each other's?
Yeah, so actually
calls?
There's not a lot of evidence in that respect, except two small tidbits of kind of a little bit of evidence and a little bit of speculation. One is that when we know that when there are echolocation calls happening, other species might approach the area when there are a lot of like what we call these terminal buzz calls. So I told you the bats are doing echolocation like pew, 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 and at the end they go like proop when they're very close. Those we call a terminal buzz, and it means that there's prey there, right? They're catching prey. So there's some evidence that bats from different species can kind of interpret that and approach areas where terminal buzzes are happening, because it's like a prey-rich area. And there's also some evidence that distress calls could be interpreted across species. So distress calls across the animal kingdom share some acoustic features that are similar. And it kind of makes sense, right? If you, grab an animal and, you don't want to hurt it, but you grabbed it in a way that it makes a squeak, it's very noticeable for you that squeak was a distress thing. So it is evolutionarily kind of interesting that different species can interpret what distress means, right? So it seems that bats can also kind of understand that a bat is in distress, even if it's not the same species of bat.
Yeah. Do you think that extends outside mammals to birds as well?
That's a good question. I don't know. And if I would have to say, like, just from personal experience, I don't know that I've ever heard a bird squeak in distress. But I would think there must be some kind of like similar patterns that would make sense for, an animal to squeak and ward off other animals that there was a predator there, right? So
Right.
I would think that there's probably something to it, but I don't have any evidence of that.
And do we know how, like in Bracken Cave in Texas, where there's millions of bats, how do the bats navigate when there's, with each other, when there's millions, to find their place in the roost? Do we have any?
Yeah, so again, to find their place in the roost, we do think that they recognize. So there's millions of bats that belong to this cave, but within that big million individual family, there's also smaller groups, and we believe that they have what we call group signatures. So for this particular species that is a free-tailed bat, this has not been studied in detail, but our lab studies something very similar with a different bat, Carolia perspicillata, and we're looking at how so the Carolia perspicillata bats, the Seba short-tailed bat, extends, or its range extends from the south of Mexico to the north of Argentina. So it's very wide, ranging. And the question is whether, and we do some field work in Belize, and we're starting field work in Peru and Argentina. And the question is whether the bats in Belize speak the same dialect than the ones in, Peru or Argentina. They're the same species. We know that generally they have the same calls, but are there group signatures? And some preliminary data that we have that we're trying to get published now points to the fact that there are these group signatures that can help them find which one is their group. So if I would have to speculate, that's kind of a similar mechanism that would be happening in Bracken Cave. They have these, call them accents or dialects, that make the group recognition easier. But it's also probably not just acoustic. They have great senses of smell. But that if you think communication has been studied very little, olfaction in bats has almost not been studied. There's a group in Texas that has done some work and another group in Canada that has done some work, but in like 2 species of bats, and it's very, very little so far. So I would love to go in that direction, but I'm more of an auditory specialist. So I don't know, I hope to have a long career. Maybe I get to do that sometime.
That would be nice. But do we know if those groups are they comprised of kins, or like are they related? Genetically related to family-wise?
To some extent. And again, you'll hear me, I think, say this throughout our conversation today. Depends on the species. And different species have different levels of how they aggregate and what there are even bats that are almost solitary, right? So they don't aggregate. And then you have like the free-tailed bat that lives in millions, right? So there's really a lot of differences across species. What I can tell you is like, for example, for the Seba short-tailed bat, we usually have a male that it's a harem-building bat, so it's a male that stays, has a lot of roost fidelity. That means it will always stay with his harem, but the females might not have as high fidelity. So they might switch roost every now and then. So that's good for, genetic variability too. And the extent to which they change roost also like changes how much they are kin with each other. So that's another part of research that we're doing, is trying to see how different environments might affect how promiscuous the bats are in wanting to change roosts.
And do we know, are there social hierarchies in different bat species?
Yeah, and then again, I feel like we know so little. Anecdotally, I feel like anybody who's done behavior with bats will tell you, oh yeah, there's some hierarchies, and there's some studies that show that bats will leave the cave, for example, in a certain order every night, which could point to a hierarchy. We are doing some studies looking at how they aggregate, because being at the center of the aggregate is very good, right? You're protected, you're far away from predators, you're warm, you're cozy, that's good. So how stable is that position? Is this always the same bat that gets that position? Our preliminary data showing that, at least in this Carolia perspicillata bats, it seems to be pretty stable, that they do have a hierarchy, and when you switch a bat out and kind of disrupt that hierarchy, they kind of fight it out a little bit and reestablish a new pecking order. And in this case, it's not pecking, but like finding that center space, right? Yeah.
And we don't know exactly what mechanisms cause a particular individual to be at the center, or how long their reign at the top would be.
We're kind of we're tracking ages. And again, depending on the species, with one insectivorous bat that I worked with, we did see that older males seem to be higher in the hierarchy, but again, this is unpublished data. Just we didn't have enough data for it to be real evidence of it. And in our preliminary data with Carolia bats, we see that the male is always peripheral, kind of protecting its harem, and the female is at the center, and we're tracking ages to see if it's like an older female, or maybe she's just a little chunkier and is able to fight her way in. We still don't know exactly what makes her.
Do we know if the family groups hunt together, the species that do hunt?
No, usually hunters are solitary hunters, but again, depends on the species, and I don't want to speak for every species, because I've worked with, closely with about 5 species of bats. Generally, we study in the lab about 12 to 15 species, and I told you there's 1,500 species, right? So I don't want to say that never happens, but from what I know of, bats usually like hunt and forage somewhat solitarily.
And so a bat that would be hunting for fish, for example, are they still able to use echolocation when they're hunting for fish?
Yeah, and it's super cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically they do use echolocation, and they catch fish that are like kind of breaking the surface or very much at the surface, and they can get acoustic feedback from those ripples that the water is making. But they're also great at passive listening. So what we mean with passive listening is just they're very good at not just taking the sounds and the echoes that they're making, but every other sound that is being made. So a tiny ripple in the water can carry a lot of information for them too.
Mm-hmm. And I was reading in one of your papers that some species of prey that are predated upon have come up with some defense mechanisms, right? That they'll do a mimic, or not a mimic, but here we go. The tiger moth have developed ultrasonic clicks which disrupt the bat's ability to successfully track prey using echolocation.
Yeah, so that's like one of the things that they can do. So different, we call it the bat-moth arms race, because evolutionary arms race, because, you know, bats become great hunters and then the moths develop things to throw them off. So yes, there's moths that produce clicks that kind of confuse them because they're not expecting that sound to come back, and it sounds to them potentially like an echo. So it makes them think that the moth is like closer, so they go into this like capture sequence when the moth is not really there. Then there are moths that have like really long, I don't want to call them tails, but on extensions of their wings that also are very prominent and make them seem like they're, again, closer to the bat, so the bat like goes for those tails instead of the whole moth. And then there's others that are just crazy. They have like evasive maneuvers that can just like shut their wings and drop, which is very cool, I think.
And a successful strategy.
Yeah,
too.
successful strategy. So yeah, there's all kinds. I think there's a group in the UK that's studying how the surface of the moth's skin, basically, it's not skin, but like the surface of the moth can be like differently reflected to like confuse the bats and these like make these echoes not very good. So yeah, there's tons of strategies, and it's a super interesting topic.
And there was something else, give false information to a conspecific bat to capture prey. Am I remembering that correctly?
One thing that they do, I'm not sure if it's false information, but they can claim food. So a bat can say like, this food is mine, and that's a communication call that they make, and they make the other bat like fly away because basically they're calling dibs on the food.
And this would be in mid-pursuit?
Mid pursuit, if there's like, and we've done this in the lab, it's a lot of fun. They're going for the same prey, and you know, crashing into each other would be terrible because they'll end up on the ground and eaten by a raccoon or whatever. So you don't want a bat on the ground. So if a bat sees a prey and hears that another bat is nearby, it might make this sound that is a food claiming call and kind of tell the other bat, hey, I call dibs on this. And then the other bat will like go silent for a bit and go away, usually. We don't know to which extent. So again, some preliminary data that we have show that the older or more like the ones higher on the hierarchy will make this call first. How do they know to back off? It's unclear yet. Why does the other bat say like, okay, right?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah,
we don't know. But you know, in animal behavior, it's been studied a lot that going into conflict with another animal is a bad. Animals try to avoid conflict if they can. Like even deer have like a whole sequence of like looking at each other before they actually fight, and they might decide to not go into a fight if the other guy is bigger than me, then I won't even try to beat him. Like I will only fight if it's worth, I have a chance of winning. And the kind of the way that makes me think of bats is like maybe they hear this food claiming call and it's not even worth it to try to fight for that prey. There's more prey somewhere else. So that's one thing that they do. And then it's also been shown that they can eavesdrop. So they can like follow another bat and kind of listening to what the other bat is doing. But I wouldn't say that's false information. That's just copying your mate.
eavesdropping in, like following to find a more prey-rich
Yeah, so
environment?
this has been done in the lab mostly, and we do think that bats are employing it as a strategy to find where the prey is. So just follow the other bat and listening to what they're doing.
Yeah. I'm just curious to go back to the species of bat. You said you're setting up field sites in Belize and Argentina. Do we have preliminary data that suggests that they do have a dialect difference?
Yeah, so actually the preliminary data that we have, so we're looking at this in different scales. So we're actually looking within Belize at 2 different populations, and then comparing that to Argentina. So one question, and to Peru too. One question is whether, across this big scale there's differences, and a different question is whether across closer geographical scales there's still differences, and we think there are. And preliminary data that we have, so we're very lucky, we also have these same bats here in the lab, like right across the corridor. So we know that our lab bats have a different dialect than our Belize bats, and they are the same species. So that's already interesting. And another thing that we know is that we got bats from 2 different places. So I got one part of my colony from the place where I did my postdoc. So Dr. Cynthia Moss at Johns Hopkins, she donated a big part of my colony. And I also got some bats from Dr. Christine Portfors at Washington State University. She donated another batch of the same species. And these 2 batches have different dialects too. So we've mixed them now, and we're still analyzing the data because we're interested in knowing if now they're converging or they're still keeping their own little dialects.
Right, yeah, that's interesting.
That is
but do those come from wild populations, or were those bred in?
It's been crazy. So they've been bred in for generations now. So I think we tracked down that the first bats came from Trinidad in the late 60s to a zoo. And then they went to the Bronx Zoo, and then they went to the Tacoma Zoo, and then they went to Canada, and then they went to Johns Hopkins, and then they came here. So they've been inbred for a really long time. We don't know the provenance of the bats from Washington State University, but yeah, they've been inbred but it's not like mice, right? Like each lab or zoo breeds their own bats, so it's not like you can't just pick up the phone and buy more bats.
Right.
The bats that exist now, and especially after COVID, airlines are not flying bats anymore. So they are just being more cautious with flying any sort of animal into the country. So if there were, like, basically the bats that are now in the US are American, and we cannot get more bats.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're very careful and cautious with our colonies.
Yeah. So one of the questions you're looking at is, do oxytocin and vasopressin expression patterns differ in brains of bats with differential roost fidelity? So what are some of your findings with regards to that?
Oh, we're still in the very early stages of that project. So we're still characterizing the expression pattern of the receptors for these hormones. Basically, just in the bats that we have, where are they expressed? And we do see that what we call the social network, the social behavior network is lighting up. So there's a lot of expression of these receptors. And these hormones are involved, in pair bonding and social interactions. So we're still characterizing, and, luckily we're seeing that they have a pretty normal mammalian distribution. Our question, or what one of my students is going to work on this next summer, she's going to go to Peru and she's going to look at bats there, and we're going to see how bats in different landscapes in Peru may be having different roost fidelity, because the idea is that if a bat is more able to change roosts, because let's say the habitat is not fragmented and there's a lot of space for them to have different roosts, then they might be able to change more. we have also, as I mentioned, field site in Belize. The habitat there is a lot more fragmented, so there's a lot of farming, and the protected areas are smaller and far apart, so bats can't switch so easy. So our hypothesis is that these bats that cannot switch so easy may have more higher roost fidelity, and maybe their expression patterns of these hormone receptors might be more similar to animals that have pair bonding and are closer to their kin than animals that are more promiscuous and are able to, switch roost every day, because that's, easy for them. They may not share these patterns of expression. But that's kind of the hypothesis. And for now, the only thing that we're doing is we've done is establish the baseline of what it looks like to be able to see how animals that maybe behave differently differ with each other.
Mm-hmm. And we could compare to humans too, right?
Yeah.
Well,
that's a cool thing we've been talking a lot about the behavioral ecology of bats, but part of our lab, I always say that we are kind of at an intersection, because we are interested in the behavioral ecology of the bats. We want to understand them, but part of that is because we want to understand them as a model for auditory perception of communication. And they are a great model for this, better than mice or rats, because they have these very complex communication signals and social behaviors, and because their brains are very similar to ours. If, the brain of a rat or a mouse or a bat, it's almost indistinguishable to somebody who, not the trained eye or the very trained eye. So that makes them an exceptional model to study these questions and try to understand why, how we perceive sounds are meant for communication, and how our brain fills in gaps. I always say, I have an accent, but hopefully I'm being understood, and it's because the brains of people are just filling up whatever I'm doing wrong acoustically. Your brain can fill it up, right? So how does the brain do that? We don't know, and that's one of the questions that we have in the lab. So we're kind of at this intersection of, behavioral ecology, wanting to understand the bats, wanting to produce information and knowledge that can help in their conservation, but also using bats as animal models to understand how humans and other animals communicate and, perceive auditory information, especially that used for communication.
Could you talk a little bit about how the neurobiology differs between urban versus rural bats? Yeah,
that's also something that we're just launching. I feel like you're catching me in all of these questions that I don't have so much data for yet. But the idea is that bats are one of the species, or some species of bats adapt really well to living in cities. We're used to living with pigeons and, squirrels, but you don't see maybe a coyote that often, right? So there's animals that can adapt really well and animals that not. And some species of bats are really good at adapting to living in a city. Now, the question there is, what neuronal changes have happened that allow bats to live in this environment that is full of light, full of sound, much more complicated, much more fragmented. Again, we're looking, one of our projects is looking at what we call microgreen spaces, so small parks. And we see that there's bats that are living in those parks, but can they, switch around and go to another park? And we believe that bats, in rural areas, don't have these blockages of, the I-90, so they can interact with each other. And again, that changes how they socialize and can change, for example, what we were talking about before of the oxytocin expression receptors, right? If you're forced to live with a smaller group, you might be more kin to that group than if you are able to switch around more. But that's one of the things. I have a collaboration now to look at the bat's eyes, because contrary to popular belief, they're not blind. And they can see pretty well in dim light, but the city is anything but dim, right? So to which extent could city lights affect how bats may be using vision? We don't know. So that's a question that, again, is open and interesting to study. But because there's so little known about bat vision, we're having to start from scratch. So my collaborator Anna Blasitz, she's also an assistant professor here at UIC in the Department of Ophthalmology, and we are just starting to look at the retinas, what do they look like, because we have to establish these baselines, which is one of the very interesting but hard things about working with bats. You get to discover a lot of new things because not much is known, but not much is known. Right. So you have to start from zero.
That makes it exciting too.
Yeah,
right?
It's exciting, but starting from zero.
So the vision and the olfactory senses are two things that are...
Yeah, that really piqued my interest, and again, I'm lucky that there's people here at UIC I can collaborate to look at these other senses, because again, I'm mostly an auditory person, so I'm that's what I've done for a long time. But I do believe that it's sensory integration. All of these senses are leading to the decisions that the bats are making.
Do you have a story from field work that you'd like to share with us?
I mean, there's plenty of stories. I think that, I've done two different kinds of field work. I've done field work here in the US, just going to people's houses. We would have people call us and saying, there's bats in my attic, please come get them. So I've been in a lot of, at this time I was in Maryland, so I've been in a lot of Maryland attics and groups, which is not a thing that I would recommend. But what was interesting, one thing that was super interesting, and this was right as COVID was starting, before the shutdown, we went to a barn that had, they had set it up as an exclusion site. So this barn was used for equine therapy. So there were kids that would use this barn, and they really needed to there was a lot of guano. And as I said, bats carry some diseases, not just rabies, but others. So you don't want kids in a barn full of guano and bats. So they wanted to get the bats out of there. And what they do is basically they seal up every entrance, and they put little cones that allow the bats to leave, but they can't come back in. But the problem is they did this over the breeding season. So a lot of the moms of those bats left for the night, and then they couldn't get back in. And we were called to remove the bats that were left inside. A lot of these bats were pups. So we ended up taking to the lab about 80 pups that had been abandoned by their mothers, and we had them survive, but this meant that we were feeding them every 3 hours with puppy formula, and that's right when the shutdown happened. So it ended up being me and another postdoc in this lab that would take turns to feed these pups. And I remember sitting on the floor of this cage where we had the many pups, saying how did my life lead to this? What am I doing? So that was kind of, I guess it's a story that is interesting. I don't know if it's a field story, but a bit of a field story. But it was funny because I found myself just feeding these bats, and we got them to adulthood, and they were super tame because they were basically hand fed. So it was a interesting, I don't know if I would say a fun experience, but yeah. And then the other kind of field work that we do is in Belize. It's very different. We get a lot more bats there because the jungle is just full of bats, and there's people this specific group that I go with. It's all bat researchers, but everybody studies something different. Some people do immunology, and some people are doing some people are looking at diabetes and how bats are able to live with this high glucose content, right? So again, we're all doing different things with the bats, so it's a great learning experience for me. And you're sitting around in this beautiful night sky surrounded by Mayan ruins and catching bats. So I enjoy that greatly. I love going with my graduate students to these trips, and it's just a great experience. And you get to see really cool bats that we don't usually work with, but they're there, so it's very cool.
Have you ever been bitten by a bat?
Unfortunately, yes. We take many precautions. Like everybody in my lab is vaccinated against rabies, and we do use gloves, like double gloves actually. Like we use our latex or nitrile gloves, and on top of it, we use like leather gloves to prevent being bitten. So I haven't had like a bite that has make me bleed because I've had the protections, but you feel them through the glove a little bit, right? Yeah, and again, depends on the species of bats. They're like, we have 2 species here in the lab, and there's one of the species that is super tame and they don't bite. I mean, we still use, they have big teeth, so just in case we use the gloves, but I've never been bitten by one of them. And yeah, so, and with experience, I also, you know, it's been a while since I've been bitten by a bat.
Yeah. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges of studying bats?
Ooh, I'm scared to sound too complainy here. Let's start by saying I love my work. I find bats super interesting, and as I said, they're like a great animal model for the kind of questions that I have. There's a lot of challenges. One, we've already talked about how, you know, we have to start from zero everywhere. Like there's very little information. A lot of us study like, there's a good community of bat researchers, and it's a very friendly community, but we all study different species. So there's also very little crosstalk sometimes, or different things about the same species. So yeah, we, you know, as I said, it's very friendly and there's a lot of collaborations, but it's the exchange of information is just hard because there's just not that much information. And the other thing is that, you know, we take, so bats are USDA protected species, unlike rats and mice. So the level of protection and kind of care and animal welfare that they have is at the same level as a primate. So for having bats in the lab, there's very strict regulation to, you know, what you cannot do and how you do it. I take animal welfare very, very seriously. I think I mentioned right before we started our conversation that I'm part of the IACUC, which is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee. So I think that this is very important to like make sure that things are done keeping, you know, the welfare of the animal first in mind. And everybody in my lab is involved in animal care, including myself. Like I feed the animals. I'm doing one of the feedings of the month, and it's mostly to, you know, check on the animals, see that they're doing good, and, you know, it's my time to like check that everything is going well. But again, all of my graduate students participate in that, and, you know, they each do about 5 feedings a month, and then we have some technicians that help with the rest. But for me, it's important that the students know, like, if they're using these animals and keeping them in captivity, it's not just an item that they buy. It's not just like how some people use mice, that they just order the mice, you know? It's important that they know what it takes to keep these animals happy and alive. So, and, you know, we're always trying to improve and give them, you know, we put like plastic plants in there so that they have some enrichment and things like that. So, but there's challenges to that because I care so much about the animal welfare. I have my own satellite facility, so my animals are not part of the big animal facility of UIC. So I'm in charge of all the logistics of, you know, keeping this facility running. And I would say that all in all, between that and my participation with the IACUC, it occupies, like, animal welfare and, you know, keeping them happy occupies about 30% of my time, which, if you compare it with somebody who works with mice or not animals like cells or computational things, they don't have they don't have to have the time dedication. But then we're all judged at the same, you know, with the same bar. So I would say that that's one of the difficulties. But again, I also think that comes with the counterpart of them being so interesting, and there's so much to do and so many questions to answer that, to me, it's worth it. If not, I wouldn't be here doing this. But yeah, sometimes, as I mentioned, when I was like sitting down and like feeding this like many pups with puppy formula, like, what have I done with my life? But yeah, you know, I've had to come until I establish the animal facility and make sure that, you know, all the sensors for temperature and humidity we were working well, like I have alarms on my phone that will go off if anything changes in their animal rooms. And for that first year that we set everything up, like for a while, I was finding myself like at 2 a.m. here checking on the bats because the sensor would tell me there was something wrong. And then it was the sensor acting up until, everything got calibrated. Like nothing ever happened,
Right.
knock on wood, but I live nearby. And the reason I live nearby is because I need to make sure that, the bats are happy and healthy. So,
Right.
yeah.
Well, how did you first become interested in bats and studying bats?
So it's very interesting because I think if you look around, and I think this is difficult with a podcast, right? But if you look around, you'll see that there's a lot of like bat little decorations. This was not me before I started working with bats.
Yeah.
And if you ask me, like I have people ask me, are bats your favorite animal? And I'm like, not really. Like I find them extremely interesting, but my favorite animal is dogs, which, I have here. But I find them extremely interesting. But the reason I started working with bats is because of the type of questions that I had. So I work in a subfield of neuroscience called neuroethology, which is understanding the neural principles of behavior. And usually neuroethology is characterized for people studying animals that do some behaviors particularly well. So it's usually weird or strange animals and not like just a typical lab rat or mouse. And bats do this weird behavior that is echolocation. And when I was looking at labs and where to do my postdoc, I was very interested with the work that Cindy Moth at Johns Hopkins was doing. And I had the opportunity to visit her lab and we just clicked. She has been an amazing mentor to me. And I really liked working with her. So in a way, like I always say, like I was interested in the brain and how the brain, specifically in social behaviors and how the brain processes this. But the reason I ended up working with bats was the person. The person that was working with bats. And Cindy was that person. And she, again, has been a great mentor and led me into this path. And when you start working with bats, you learn more about them. They're super interesting, and they're probably my second favorite animal. And it does become kind of part of your personality at one point.
But so when you were an undergraduate, you did not have an interest in bats at that point yet?
Not yet. I definitely had an interest generally in animal behavior. And for my PhD, I actually worked with mice and with crabs and doing comparative work with these two very distant species and seeing how, they shared some common neural principles. So that to me was very interesting. Like how much could we expand from like studying diverse animals and seeing what is similar across them? What can they tell us about the brain that if it's similar across these two very distant animals, it's probably similar to us too. So those were the type of questions that during undergrad and PhD I was developing. I did my PhD and undergrad in Argentina, and at least where I studied, there was nobody studying bats. And I do think that, again, I feel like I have a million questions and I would possibly be excited to work with any animal doing any behavior and trying to understand how their brain works. I just find animal behavior fascinating. Like I did seek out specifically of the labs that I was looking at, bats specifically caught my attention because they're so unique, right?
And so what are some of the neural similarities between crabs and mice then?
Yeah, so it's super interesting. Actually, we were looking at how these animals acquire memories and consolidate them, basically like store them for long term, right? And for both mice and crabs, there's a molecular mechanism with a protein, a transcription factor called NF-kappa B, that gets activated when the animal is consolidating the memory. Now, if you disrupt in either of these animals this protein, then they won't remember. So both and their brains are so different, right? The mammalian brain of the mouse is much more similar to us. The brain of the crab is a few neurons put together.
Yeah, right.
Well, if people that work with crabs hear me say that, they won't be happy, but it's a very different brain, but still this molecular mechanism on how this memory becomes like a long-term stored memory is the same, which to me is extremely interesting because it shows a very conserved path to storing memories, right? Regardless of the differences in the brains.
That is very interesting, yeah. I'd never suspect that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is the most intelligent behavior that you've seen bats?
That's a great question. I think they're super smart. They're very stubborn too. So it's not fun to train a bat because they don't want to, but they will learn. And one of the things, and when they are willing to learn, they learn really fast. So one of the species I work with, the big brown bat, so this North American insectivorous bat, they're very lazy, right? So a thing that they'll learn very fast is to sit tight and wait for food. And they learn that within a day. It's crazy. And I think that's very smart, right? Knowing that you can put them in an elevated platform and, the first time they'll fly off. And then you put them again and you give them a little mealworm and they will stay a little longer. And then, but within a day, you can get this bat to sit on an elevated platform and just wait to be fed, which is fantastic, I think, or like a show of intelligence. But, again, different species do different things. And another thing that I find very interesting is that one of the species that we have in the lab, Rosettas aegypticus, they're a bit bigger than the Carolia that I was talking about before. They recognize us, it's very clear, and they become very tame towards their handlers, which I also think is an impressive show of intelligence because, they know that we're not there to hurt them and they recognize us and they're willing to let themselves be held, which is very unnatural for any animal, right? So, yeah.
And do you notice different personalities between different bats?
Yeah, so definitely there's personalities. And, we have some favorites. We have some bats that are very tame and we really like them because of that. So there's a lot of personalities. I have one student, we are now in the midst of publishing one of his papers. He did some work on how, how they change how they forage when they were with another bat or alone. And one of the more interesting surprises that we found with that is that it really depends on who they're paired with. So the individual personalities of the bats seem to be like the most salient thing or the most important thing that made them behave differently, right? Other than, you always think of, you design your experiment and you think, okay, I have like 6 males and 6 females, and you kind of assume that all females will behave the same and all males will behave the same, or even like that all bats will behave the same. And it was really not the case. So that was, to me, like super interesting. We did see some, female-male differences, and we did see that basically when they're in mixed pairs, they really switch up the way they're eating or they're foraging. But yeah, the biggest, most important, effect was that who they were paired with was interesting. Yeah.
What do you think is the most dangerous myth about bats out there currently?
It's interesting because I do think that the potential, I would say, COVID myth is a dangerous one for bats and for humans. Let me tell you why for bats. So for bats, people got so scared that a lot of bats that had no COVID or nothing to do with COVID ended up dying because there were some cullings in caves around the world because people got scared of the bats and didn't want COVID there, and they burnt down entire roosts of animals that, had nothing to do with COVID. So that's obviously bad for the bats and bad for the ecosystems because, as I said, bats play many important roles, from pollinators to, insect control. So it was really bad for that. But then for humans too, I feel like, people go all the way on the other end of the spectrum, and then in an effort to want to protect or demystify the bats, then they're not cautious enough, because there are some risks, and you don't want to touch a bat without a gloved hand. We never touch a bat with a gloved hand, without a glove on. And there are like videos online of people like feeding bats and with their hands, and it's like, this is bad, right? And it's like, on the one hand, it's like, I'm happy that bats are getting a better reputation, but I also think it's dangerous that, there's specifically, I can't remember the handle, and it's good that I don't, so that people don't go looking for this person, but there's a person that has bats and puts like TikTok videos and has this bat as pets, and people are commenting, oh, I want one, where did you get one? And it's like, no, like we shouldn't be trafficking wild animals, and these are wild animals that could carry disease, so you don't want to be having that. So I feel like the myth that they're very dangerous, the myth that they drink your blood, that's a bad myth, and it's a bad reputation for them, because that's not what they do. They won't attack a human. It's dangerous for them because people react very negatively and kill them. But on the other hand, not being cautious enough is dangerous for humans, and in turn for them, right? Because if there's another outbreak and it does come from a bat, then there will be more cullings, and so it's they're wild animals, and we should be cautious, but not scared.
But the vampire bat does take mammalian blood,
yes, right? But not human blood.
Human blood.
Yeah, so they're super interested, and there's only like 3 species of vampire bats, and they mostly go for cattle and for like poultry, and they won't kill the prey. They make a little bite and drink a little bit of their blood, but it's it's not like the myth.
What is the most bizarre mating ritual that you've seen bats exhibit?
Oh, there are 2. Let me tell you about 2. One that I find very fun is something that a colleague of mine, Yossi Yovel in Israel, described, that is the scrounging behavior. So one of the species that we have here in the lab, Rosetta's aegypticus, they will, basically the females will steal fruit from some males, and if the male allows this to happen, they will be more likely to be mated with that. So basically we can think of this piece of fruit that they're allowing to be scrounged from their mouths as like a nuptial gift. So I really like that. I find that very interesting. And that's kind of related to this work that we're in the midst of publishing. But then another one, I read a paper a few years ago that I remember I read the title and I thought, okay, they have me with the title. This is fascinating. It was this bat in Central America, and the title was something like The Masked Seducers, right? And these bats have like a flap of skin that they put over their faces, and they perform something called lek behavior, which is like all the females are perched there, and they will just display themselves to be chosen by the female. So that is not described in a lot of species of bats. It was described in this species, but on top of that there's this whole addition to it that not only they display themselves, but they mask themselves with this flap of skin that they have, and they're pretty ugly. I mean, bats can be very cute, but these ones don't have a cute face, so I can understand why they're masking it.
But when they do their display, is this a flight display? Is this
Yeah, so the females are like perched in like a branch or different parts of a tree, and then the males like kind of are like hovering and flying in front of them. It's not a dance or anything as complicated as like what we can see in birds. They just basically show themselves off.
Yeah, but they mask up before this.
Yes.
Do the females also have this flap, or?
I actually don't know. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. Probably. There's not a lot of sexual, I would say probably because there's not a lot of sexual dimorphism in bats. So there are, bats that have, like, the males have some glands that the females don't have. So in the case of this species, I'm not sure, but usually unless you basically look at their genitals, it's hard to tell bats apart. It's not like birds that usually by their plumage you can tell.
Right, yeah. And males and females in most species are the same size.
Depends on the species.
Right.
For example, rosettas, females are a lot smaller, or about like 30 grams smaller. So we can usually tell, like, if we grab one. But in most other, like Carolia, they're the same. And they weigh the same, they're the same size. Like, unless you look at their genitals, it's impossible to tell.
Yeah. Has there been a work of fiction that has impacted your life?
Bat related. I do think that Dracula, and this is funny, but Dracula, it's a really good book, and I do recommend it. It sent chills down my back. It's a really, like, a horror story. I'm not sure if anything really bat related, but there is a book that, if I have a minute to recommend, impacted my life a lot. It's called Last Chance to See by Douglas Adams, who's the writer of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's incredibly hilarious. He passed away. He was incredibly hilarious, and wrote this book about some species that are or were in ways of extinction, and the efforts that people were doing around the world to keep those species alive. And that, as a biologist and a person interested in animals and behavior, that book was a big game changer for me. So it's not a work of fiction, but it's a beautiful book that I recommend.
Nice. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
Do you think there are more bat species yet to be discovered?
Yes, because I think that there's, we have new tools now if you just look at bats, a lot of them look alike, but it doesn't mean that they're the same species. And now that we have more tools to kind of molecularly distinguish the species, I think we will continue to find more species. And there's also places that are pretty impenetrable. Even in Belize, we know that there's more species than what we usually see. So not all species fall in our nets, and but we know they're there because either acoustic accounts, or there's a good friend and colleague of mine works with environmental DNA. So basically she picks up DNA from the environment and can check what that DNA belongs to. And we know that there are species in the forest in Belize that, like, we've never seen. They're there, their DNA is in the air, it's in the environment, but we don't catch them. So what else is there that we might not be catching or seeing or missing? So yeah, I do think that, the number of described species grows every year, and I don't see it stopping anytime soon.
Are there any bat species that are active during the day?
Yes, a ton. You know how I mentioned that there were about 1,000 that use echolocation? Most of those are nocturnal, but of the other 500, a lot of them are diurnal, because these bats have huge eyes, and one of them, a very common one, is the flying foxes, right? And even the rosettas here that we have in the lab have been shown to be foraging during the day. So even them, that they can echolocate, but they have big eyes, and they do forage sometimes during the day. So they're not only constrained to the night.
But the flying foxes don't use echolocation.
No, the flying foxes do not use echolocation.
Yeah. But they would dispel the blind as a bat idea, right? Yeah,
you would think, but people still think that they're blind. So that's another myth that we'll need to
eradicate.
Yeah.
Have you done any work with regards to white nose syndrome with bats?
I have not done work, but I am part of a group, the Midwestern Bat Research Group, and the local Chicagoland area bat group, and there's a lot of people in these groups that are doing more like local conservation, and they do reports on how many bats have been. So I'm aware basically of everything that's happening and the efforts that are being made to try to protect these bats. White nose has been terrible. It affected some bat species, especially like the Myotis, Lucifugus species, very badly, so decimated populations. And it was so fast that basically by the time there was, we knew about it, there was already like kind of too late. So I know that there's a lot of people trying to, work on this, count bats, try to prevent or protect some of the hibernacula where these bats hibernate, because that's when it happens. Basically, the fungus grows when they're hibernating and then they can't breathe. So there's an attempt or a lot of work going to trying to like stop the spread and protect the bats, but it's already caused a lot of damage for a lot of U.S. bat populations.
Do we notice that are the bat populations rebounding in some places?
Not yet for Myotis that I know of, or at least the last reports I heard from this group did not seem to point in that direction. But again, I don't really directly work with that, so maybe there's some more recent stuff that I haven't seen. I know that there's some species that are fine, like the big brown bats that I talked about throughout today. They have not really been affected by white nose, so they're fine, and they're still a very populous species considered of least concern and conservation. So not all species have been affected equally.
What do you think is something that we as humans could learn from bats?
Well, they live all together in these caves of 18 million, and they're getting along. So if I would have to think of that kind of example, it would be great if we could do that too. It seems like we're at a moment in time where there's a lot of fragmentation with humans living with each other and, tolerating each other. And I wish we would be more like bats and be more tolerant of all of our neighbors.
Yeah. And how has your work studying bats impacted your own humanity, you think?
So I think more and more, like as I said, from a very young age, I liked animals and I wanted to work with animals. Working with bats in particular really opened my eyes to how much they do for us. In terms of, as I said, like things that they do for the environment, how important they are for the ecosystem in ways that maybe other animals that I had worked with before or that I knew growing up, I hadn't really realized of this like benefit that they're producing, or the importance of why they need to be, preserved and protected. So more and more, I think the concern about how we are protecting our environment and how we are caring for those that live in it has become stronger. And animal welfare has also been a thing that I've always been interested in it, and I always thought it was important, but working with bats and learning more about all the regulations that cover USDA protected species have made me more aware and more interested in, fighting that good fight and making sure that we do treat the animals with the respect that they deserve. Because I do believe animal research is important and we can learn a lot, and a lot of, good to humanity comes from animal research. But we need to be, respectful of those animals and make sure that those animals are cared with the highest standards. So those are, I think, two things that occupy my mind a lot and have so more since working with bats.
And where do you see your research going in the next 5 years?
Well, I hope to have a lot of answers to the questions that you asked me today that I feel I couldn't fully answer.
Well, in fairness to you, those are obviously things that you're working on currently. But
yeah, so I hope to have many answers to that. So the lab is about 3 and a bit years old now. And as I mentioned, I spent the first year setting up these colonies and their animal facilities. And now we're starting to produce results and really like dig into the questions that we're interested in. So in the next 5 years, I really would like to have like a good established idea of how these dialects occur across different populations of bats within a species, and furthermore kind of continue to understand the neural mechanisms underlying these understandings of the different dialects. I don't know, let's talk in 5 years.
I'll be back, yeah.
I do hope to continue understanding, social behavior and communication in bats.
Is there a question that I didn't ask that you wish I had asked?
I mean, I feel we didn't talk as much about, the auditory perception part. We kind of mentioned it in passing, and kind of going back to the type of work that we do, not just in the field and in terms of the behavioral ecology. That is also somewhere where I hope my lab can grow in continuing to establish bats as animal models to study these questions, because I do think that science, we used to study many different animals, the best animal possible to study your question. Then with the advent of genetic tools, a lot of things went into like studying mice. But we need to remember that mice are not tiny humans, and a lot of the things done with mice will not have answers to human health. It's still very interesting, and we still should do this research because we don't know what could potentially be impactful. But I think people like myself that work with what we call non-traditional animal models want to advocate that we shouldn't just study mice. And it's true, we have all the background with mice, but sometimes making that effort of establishing the background with other species that may be better suited to study the question that we want to study, and establishing then the differences and commonalities across the different animals can tell us more about our brain than if we just study mice. If we just study mice, we'll know a lot about mice. But if we want to know about the brain and the human brain, we have to study mice, rats, bats, all sorts of animals, crabs, as we were talking about before, to see like what is shared across all of these, and is that shared with us? That would be like the big question that I have, and my kind of 2 cents in saying why we need to study different animals and not just mice.
Are you a mate drinker?
I am. I don't have one here in the office.
Mate here.
No, I'm a social mate drinker. I don't like making the mate. I like somebody else making the mate, and I'll drink it. So I'm very lazy to make it myself. Yeah.
Are you a football fan or soccer fan?
Only during the World Cup.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we're looking forward to the next one. But yeah, during the World Cup, I'm very much so.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate the time. Okay. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. This was a fun conversation. I really do hope to have more answers. So we should talk again in the future.
I'll be back. Yes, absolutely.